Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the first video of 2022 and we're gonna kick it off by talking about a watch that I featured in my State of the Collection video, which you can watch on my channel. So today we're gonna be talking about this watch right here. This is the Seiko Lordmatic. So this is a vintage watch and it's gonna be the first vintage wristwatch that I'm gonna feature on this channel. Now, vintage watch collecting is a lot different compared to collecting modern watches. I like to compare it to when people collect vintage cars versus modern cars. When you buy something that's brand new, you kind of expect it to have no flaws at all. And if there's a flaw, you usually just return it. But when it comes to things like vintage watches or anything that's vintage, you have to expect that there's going to be some flaws. To be honest, I was a little bit naive when I bought this watch because I actually thought that, well, I was hoping that there would be no flaws. But definitely once I unboxed it and once I started using it, there are some issues with this watch that you can't see on the surface level. Now, before I get to showing you the watch, I do have one request to make. So normally for my videos, I don't ask people to like and subscribe. It's not because I don't want them to do that, but it makes me feel kind of like a sellout when I ask people to do that. But I have been tracking my channel and it looks like I'm very close to becoming a YouTube partner. And basically what I need is 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time within a 1-year period. And my watch channel started taking off around March 1st, 2021. So basically I have until March to become a YouTube partner. So if you do enjoy this video, I highly encourage you guys to subscribe. But without further ado, let's look at the photos and description when it was listed on Yahoo Auctions Japan. So here's the auction page and you can see that I got this from Yahoo Auctions Japan and I used the proxy site buy.jp. And so yeah, this is the Seiko Lordmatic 5606-8100 and it says that was made in 1975. And if we quickly go over the photos here, you can see that when I looked at the listing, it looked like it was a pretty deep gold, almost like an amber color. And here's also a picture of a movement. But yeah, that's what really attracted me to this watch, is that color. It's just really unique and distinct. And looking at the description, I won't go over it too much into detail, but it did say that the condition was not too bad and they did perform some basic maintenance. Price-wise, the watch costs around $290, but once you include shipping as well as the duty fees, it went out to about $350. Alright, let's move on to the unboxing experience, which unfortunately I was very disappointed when I found on my doorstep. I saw that it was packaged in this little snack box. So this watch traveled halfway around the world in a tiny snack box. And I get that this watch isn't super expensive or anything, but I feel like this watch could have been treated with more respect. This is by far the worst unboxing experience I've ever had for a watch, but at least they did wrap the watch in bubble wrap when they sent it, so at least that's something. But anyways, let's move on to talking about the dial, because I think that's the biggest conversation starter here. You can see that in the auction photos, the dial had a honey gold look to it, but you can see that in normal lighting conditions, it almost has the look of raw honey instead. I normally try and avoid watches with a yellow or an orange dial, because I find that they can look a little bit tacky. But this watch's dial color is more of a subtle yellow, and the dial almost turns like a brown color in dark lighting conditions. You really only get that honey gold or amber look when the watch is in direct lighting conditions. And unfortunately, under direct light, we see the first problem that I have with this watch, which is the amount of dust that's trapped on the dial. If we go back to the Yahoo Auctions Japan description, you can see that basic maintenance was performed. So I can only assume that either when they performed the maintenance, they weren't very careful, so a lot of dust got underneath the dial, or that dust was already there to begin with and they didn't bother cleaning it off. You could argue that it's not that big of a deal because I could probably send it to a watchmaker and they could clean it off for me, but I was a little bit disappointed when I found this out because when you look at the auction website, it didn't mention anything about dust underneath the dial. And the provided photos didn't hint towards any dust underneath the dial either. Other than the dust underneath the dial, I actually have no complaints about the look of the watch. I like the applied indices, hands, and logo, and I think both daytime and nighttime visibility is pretty good, despite the color of the dial. Now unfortunately, this watch doesn't have any lume, but I think that might be because of the age of the watch. I think the black streaks on the hands and indices used to be lume, but they probably faded away over time. Moving on to the crystal, which is also an interesting aspect of this watch, we can see that it's multifaceted, which causes the image of the dial to distort along the edges. Personally, I'm a huge fan of multifaceted crystals because I feel like it gives the watch a lot more character. Most modern watches don't have this feature anymore, however, and I think the last watch that actually had a multifaceted crystal was the SARB 001 that was released back in 2006. Part of this reason could be because they just fell out of style, but I think another reason is because these multifaceted crystals are much more prone to chipping. You can see that some of the corners have already chipped. To be fair though, the seller did state that there would be some chips and scratches on the crystal, so I really can't complain. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep this watch in good condition, because I'm not too sure how difficult it'll be to find a multifaceted replacement. Now let's talk about the case. It's a mix of both brushed and polished surfaces, and based on the edges of the case, I would say that this watch has never been repolished before. Most watch collectors will prefer their watches being unpolished because too much polishing will cause the edges to become rounded, which may distort the look of the watch. I personally don't care too much if a watch has been polished again or not, but this would help me if I decide to resell this watch in the future. I'll also note that the style of case is something you don't see anymore. On one hand, this can be a good thing because it makes the watch feel special since the design is a reflection of fashion of the 1970s. On the other hand, this can be a bad thing because some people may look at this design and think that it's tacky and outdated. Personally, I'm indifferent to the case design. It's the crystal and dial that speak much more to me. Flipping to the back, we have a solid stainless steel case back, and I haven't removed it yet to check on the movement. The seller did provide a picture of the movement, and they said that basic maintenance was performed, so I'll have to take their word for it for now. I found that the watch has been accurate to about plus or minus 10 seconds per day, with a power reserve of about 48 hours. Next up, I'm going to talk about the crown, and normally I don't spend too much time talking about it, because if a crown is functional, there's really not much else to say about it. Unfortunately for this watch, the quick set day date feature is non-functioning. When I looked at the auction listing, I don't understand Japanese, so I had to rely on the English translation, and it said that currently fast forward is performed, but the setting is NG, so set it manually. Honestly, I didn't really understand what that meant, but because they said that currently fast forward is performed, I assumed that the quick set feature was functioning. Now from what I've read from watch forums, I think that the fast forward function relies on a piece of plastic within the movement, and that piece of plastic typically breaks after a while. Now if there's any watchmakers that are watching this video, let me know if this is the correct diagnosis. Unfortunately, the broken day date feature isn't the only issue with the crown. When I pull it out, you can clearly see that the crown is slightly bent. But fortunately, this hasn't affected the ability to hand wind or set the time for the watch. It still sucks that the crown is bent though, because there was no mention of that in the listing description. It is also possible that transporting a watch in a snack box may have caused some damage along the way. Moving on to the dimensions, you might be able to tell by now that this watch is made for people with small wrists. Case size is 36mm with a lug-to-lug of just 40mm. The integrated lugs measure 18mm, and the bracelet tapers down to 15.5mm. And even though it has a multifaceted crystal, the thickness is only 11mm. These dimensions translate to a very comfortable watch on my 6-inch wrist. Vintage watches are generally smaller compared to modern ones, which is great for small-wristed people like myself. And the bracelet it comes with will actually only accommodate people who have wrists that are smaller than 6.5 inches. That's because it's a rolled link bracelet, and the only way you can change the sizing is through the micro adjusts on the clasp. You can see that I've adjusted it to the middle position, so I think only people with wrist sizes between 5.5 to 6.5 inches can actually wear this bracelet. And to make matters worse, one of the watch links seemed to have been stretched out a little bit. The bracelet does seem pretty sturdy, so I'm not worried about the watch bracelet completely falling apart, but cosmetically, that stretched out link doesn't look very good. Another thing is that the clasp feels pretty loose. Even though right now it's pretty tight and secure, I can easily just take one finger and easily let it open. And this isn't something that I experienced with my other watches, so I just have to think that it's because of the age of the clasp, it's just a lot more easier to pull out accidentally. Now I know I've spent about the last 10 minutes just criticizing this watch. I've talked about the dust underneath the dial, the day date set not working, the crystal is chipped, the bracelet, there's a problem with the link, the clasp is loose, the crown is bent. And yes, those are all bad things, but also keep in mind that this watch is twice as old as I am. Remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about how vintage watches, you gotta set your expectations to a reasonable level. There's always gonna be something wrong with them. And if you look at this watch as a whole, it is in pretty good condition. Like it's not that dirty. You know, the bracelet sag, you know, it's not sagging that much. The dial is still in good condition. The case is still in good condition. So really that's all you can ask for really. Part of me does wonder how much of this damage was caused during transportation from Japan to here, because again, this was shipped in a snack box. Now I'm sure I could send this watch to a watchmaker to get at least some of these issues fixed, but then the issue comes of whether or not it's actually worth it. Because again, I got this watch for less than $300, and I'm sure sending it to be serviced would cost around $200 to $300 alone. And that's kind of the issue with affordable watches as they get older, is it really worth fixing if it's going to cost more than the value of the watch, or should you just buy a new watch altogether? Now, whether or not this is worth servicing in the future is something I'm going to have to think about. But for now, I can say that the Seiko Lordmatic is a great little vintage timepiece, and I recommend this lineup for anybody who's looking for a colorful watch or watches with multifaceted crystals. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more videos. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.